Well, today it's time. We are having our pre-season tier list right at the beginning of basically the patch that will bring us to Season 2. For today, we have the healers worth talking about. Now, because we are very innovative and we're not just sticking with just a boring, simple tier list, we are trying to be a little bit more precise by also having our beautiful alignment chart, because sometimes, you say, oh yeah, sure, one spec, let's say fire is A and frost is A, but what if I mean fire is mandatory in Mythic Plus and terrible in the raid, and frost is like decent at both? Putting them both in A is a bit misleading, doesn't really paint the picture. Whereas if you went in the alignment chart, you will be able to put fire towards the S tier in Mythic while still being towards the Z tier in raiding, like for example over here. Whereas if frost was decent at both Mythic Plus and the raid, you would be able to put frost here. So it would paint at least a better picture about the state, the power level of specs right now in the upcoming season. So we're talking about the specs after looking at their performance in the PTR. Not just the raid testing, because at this point the raid testing was from like 3 weeks ago, but also the current and undergoing Mythic Plus testing being done in the PTR. We have made a couple of videos about the popularity of these specs in Mythic Plus to try to gauge, to try to get an idea of how much value, how much hope players were putting in certain specs based on how often they were being played in the PTR. So, starting with the healers, we have to put immediately a couple of specs at the bottom, which are Resto Shaman and Holy Paladin. Now, this is weird because Resto Shaman has been one of the more popular specs in Season 1. It started out this Season 1 Mythic Plus, to be meta for about a month and a half before they lost out on, well, not even another healer, they just lost out on Enhancement Shaman. And Holy Paladin has been consistently average, consistently middle of the pack. So the situation is mostly just the depression of the other healers getting better things, getting better tools, or being straight up buffed, compared to these two specs not really receiving any major changes in 11.1. Resto Shaman is in fact being nerfed in 11.1. They are losing out on Ancestral Guidance. Blizzard has given them a couple of 4% compensation healing buffs, but it's still not gonna bridge the gap of losing Ancestral Guidance, and more importantly, still being terrible with your mana regen, your mana conservation. Yes, Farseer is not that bad. Farseer is actually pretty good with mana. Unfortunately, the powerful hero talent right now is Totemic, which drains your mana like crazy as you play around Chainheal and the Surging Totem itself, so you have tons of mana problems. Now, when it comes to our alignment chart of both of these specs, they are in fact not bad. In fact, the power level of Resto Shaman in Mythic Plus was still high. It's not that they have gotten too weak in Mythic Plus compared to when they were powerful in Season 1. So they still are pretty high on the Mythic Plus level. They just lose out a bit more when it comes to the raid because of their mana issues. Somewhat similar as Holy Paladin, except Holy Paladin wasn't even nearly as good when it came to Mythic Plus. But they are more or less in the same disappointing, no major changes situation when it comes to healers. Talking about way more changes, you have Holy Priest, which has received a good amount of changes. Now, this is a bit, a bit on the fence between A and B. It's good that we have the alignment chart to better paint the picture, because the situation is that they are still woeful. They are still terrible in Mythic Plus. So Mythic Plus, Holy Priest is still awful. In the raid, they are still quite good. So they are quite powerful in the raid, but quite poor in Mythic Plus. So where do you want to put them? If you value the raid more, then Priest is here. If you value it less and you were thinking about Mythic Plus, then Priest would be here. Or actually, properly Mythic Plus, Priest would even be here. The main issue is that Holy Priest still has absolutely zero waves, zero powerful defensives in Mythic Plus. The Guardian Spirit is not a thing. Okay, the Guardian Spirit requires you to heal. It's not that good, and even if it actually did do what it's supposed to do, which is proc the cheat death, save someone from dying, then it would go into a 3-minute cooldown, which is massive, so it's not good. You don't have that many ways to save players besides very, very good spot healing, which is ultimately what makes them very good in the raid, because one of the powerful tools of you having a raid comp is to be able to spread what you need. Do you need massive burst healing? Don't go for Holy Priest. Do you need powerful raid cooldowns? Don't go for Holy Priest. Do you need spot healing? Are you in fights where 2, 3 or 4 players at the same time are gonna be ticking for a lot of damage? Then Holy Priest is perfect for that kind of fight. So it remains one of the niche picks in the raid for filling the spot healing category. So even if there is a super OP spec, like for example Flame Shaper in Season 1, doesn't matter to Holy Priest. Why? Because Flame Shaper doesn't do spot healing. So every single time you need spot healing, you will still have to go to a spec similar to Holy Priest. So their value in the raid remains higher than in Mythic Plus, which still has the same problem. They don't have a lot of defensive power, external power, and their way to AoE is also quite poor. It's good, it's consistent, it's over time, but in Mythic Plus it's a bit weaker in terms of how quickly and how fast they can bring up groups. Even with Sanctify as their main AoE heal, it's not really that powerful either. So in Mythic Plus, they still have that problem. Now, next up, you would have Preservation Evoker. Now, Preservation Evoker, we might even actually bring it here now, because before, they had this problem, Preservation Evoker, that their Mythic Plus situation was extremely limited by even just the existence of Augmentation Evoker. However, we are now all hoping that Augmentation Evoker is dead, or almost dead, you know, crawling on the ground, grasping for air. This might leave more room for Preservation Evoker to be more viable. They have not lost their power in the raid. They still have their unique power level of Flame Shaper Evoker with Engulf, having good burst healing. It has also been buffed in 11.1. Preservation Evoker is, especially Flame Shaper. Now that Flame Shaper goes from having a 30-second cooldown to having a 27-second cooldown to also being hasted, which means that the breakpoint being, I think, somewhere around 20% haste to bring your Engulf below a 23-second cooldown, which means you would be able to use 2 Engulfs into stasis, and then 2 more Engulfs by themselves, and then 2 more Engulfs for stasis again, which is very powerful. It's something that you cannot do right now with the default cooldown of Engulf, so it's getting more value in 11.1. As well as other very good QOL like Dream Breath, always hitting the Preservation Evoker, making it very easy for you to engulf yourself every time, as well as Blossoms, no longer consuming echoes, making the use of Blossom and the use of Blossom talents more usable, especially in the raid, because Blossom generally, it's a raid tool more often than the Mythic Plus tool. So their value in both the raid and Mythic Plus is quite high, especially in the raid though. In Mythic Plus, again, they are good. There's been this thing ever since Augmentation came out. They have very good tools to keep up the group. Pretty decent defensive, you know, 1 minute cooldown, time dilation is very good. And if you play Flame Shaper, okay, fine, you likely won't in Mythic Plus, but you also have your own Renewing Blaze to give out to the tank as an extra defensive, for example. It's still good. It was just bogged down a bit more by Augmentation. So under the assumption that Augmentation number 1 is getting weaker, and number 2, you might find more room for Preservation, then their value in Mythic Plus goes up by a bit more than these two, but at the same time their value in the raid is still very high, so probably around here. And overall we could say A tier generally. Now with 3 specs left, we start with Resto Druid. Resto Druid also stays in A, possibly for opposite reasons, meaning that their value in Mythic Plus is higher than the one in the raid. The one in the raid is much closer to average, you know, between S and terrible tier, they will be like B, B plus, A, somewhere around here. With their value though in Mythic Plus, however, being higher. There isn't much to say about Resto Druid because there haven't been too many changes about Resto Druid itself in the Spec 3. They have gotten the rework, the overhaul to their general 3. That's true, but in terms of the spec itself right now, not much is changing besides the change to their mastery and the way it scales, which is not actually a buff for Mythic Plus. It's better for the raid. I guess it's better in Mythic Plus as long as you have 3-ish hots on each player. If you start dunking a bunch of hots on a single player, it loses out value more now in Mythic Plus compared to now in live, but their value is still there. Now they also have a much easier to reach interrupt as a Resto Druid, normal interrupt, not just Solar Beam. And they have gotten also tankier now in Mythic Plus, so the value is still there. They have a high value for now, probably higher in this Mythic Plus line than all of these. And when it comes to the raid, yeah, pretty much in the middle. You know, nothing too great, nothing too little. They are a specific straight throughput spec. Their big cooldown flourish is only a 1 minute cooldown that they cycle through every time, and with the buffs of regrowth, they also now are better at spot healing. Perhaps not quite as seen here, not quite as Holy Priest good at spot healing, but still, you know, serviceable enough to be a possible avenue for them to heal in the raid in that style. The top two are Mistweaver and Discipline. That's pretty much as simple as it is. Prior to this, we could have probably, you know, dunked everyone down one tier, put Mistweaver below Discipline. However, we have just documented the heavy nerfs going the way of Discipline. Especially heavy nerfs in Mythic Plus, because the major nerf was to Mindbender and to Void Weaver, and the way you play in Mythic Plus is always like that. In the raid, you had more rooms, you had more options to play with traditional Shadow Fiend, traditional 90-second cooldown windows around Evangelism, so technically you could almost completely ignore all of the nerfs and go back to play Shadow Fiend anyways in the raid. This is not something you can do in Mythic Plus. In Mythic Plus, you were just playing as often as possible with Mindbender. So obviously you're gonna have to eat the nerf of Mindbender and the way it scales now with your Void Rat in Void Weaver all the time if you are playing in Mythic Plus. So it's a pretty hefty nerf when it comes to their Mythic Plus value. And still a nerf, but not as large as the nerf for Mythic Plus. So this means that now, with these two specs, the value in Mythic Plus was very high for both. It was perhaps you know, slightly higher for Discipline, like this. After the nerfs, perhaps now they are closer up together than they were before. Now, when it comes to their value in the raid, it's still quite high for both. For the very simple fact that they are both doing very useful things in the raid. Perhaps it's a bit, yeah, maybe put Priest a bit lower down just to make sure that these specs are the higher up right now, something like this. Now, Discipline does have, with this new addition of the changes in 11.1, lenience practically always there, and now that lenience is split from Evangelism, you can take them both, which means that every time the Discipline Priest is ramping, doing a big 20-man ramp, you are giving the entire raid a 3% damage reduction, which is very, very powerful. It's intangible. You won't see this in the meters, but it's gonna be there. It's one of the reasons why it will carry a lot of weight, a lot of power in the early progression. Reducing the damage of your entire group by 3% is very valuable. Also, with the changes, you're possibly likely moving over to Oracle compared to Void Weaver, because Oracle as a hero talent is much more about big burst that you can cycle every 90 seconds. So now that your Mindbender has been nerfed and your 30-second windows of healing are very, very weak compared to live, you might as well switch over to Oracle and focus yourself much more on bigger burst windows, which is what is going to make you quite powerful in the raid and give you a unique tool, a unique power tool to sort of try to fight over Preservation Evoker. That is perhaps one of the head-to-head you will have to fight, possibly in your guild even, between your comp having the big burst healing being for Discipline compared to the big burst healing being for Preservation Evoker, or possibly being both. Right now there were more options, more possibilities of running double Discipline Priest in the raid. After the nerf, possibly less likely. Either way, Preservation Evoker's value is still there. For Mistweaver, it's a bit different. Mistweaver, we have covered them in the PTR testing of the raid. They had consistently the highest healing in the testing. And in Mythic Plus, they had grown up to have the highest damage as well in Mythic Plus. Now, Mistweaver kept having very high throughput, very powerful ways to heal the entire party in Mythic Plus, whether it was from your Chiji, your Fist Weaving, your Rising Mist hits, your Shalen's Gift procs on the entire party. You did have very good tools to sustain party damage very often in Mythic Plus. So this season is supposed to be quite nasty healer-wise. There is quite a lot of damage going out. Not perhaps the same or not even as many one-shot angles or super high angles difficult to survive on a single player, but in terms of ticking damage, rot damage, big hits constantly requiring healing, it's quite high up this season, and Mistweaver is extremely good at doing that. So it's a lot of value in Mythic Plus, not just for their healing but also for their damage, and also their HPS in the raid is still very high value. That's where we are putting Mistweaver together with Discipline very high up, because in terms of their value, both from a Mythic Plus perspective, they are the two highest, and from the raiding perspective, they are the two highest as well. Close though, unlike Mythic Plus where they are more high up. Perhaps Resto Druid is, yeah, it's a bit disingenuous, they should be a bit higher up there, like this. But they are the two highest, and in the raid, they are right there with Preservation Evoker and with Holy Priest, possibly even a bit closer up when it comes to Resto Druid. So this is the point right now when it comes to the situation of the healers in the upcoming season. It was good to have waited to make this on what we think is going to be the last of the balance tuning passes, because it's gonna be hard to imagine Blizzard putting any major changes just a few days before the launch of the season. So it is possible that this is what we're gonna get. This is what we're gonna see at the beginning of the season. So it was good to have this recap video when it comes to the current power of the healers in 11.1 based on what we have seen in the testing of the raid as well as the testing of Mythic Plus so far in the PTR, as an idea of what to expect on this upcoming patch. But for today, on this whatever this is, Wednesday, Thursday, I lost count, we can now leave each other. We're starting as usual the goodbyes by thanking everyone for having watched the video, together with, of course, everyone else who's been supporting completely for free by liking and commenting down below, as well as subscribing to the channel itself. Now, with these things out of the way, thank you guys again for watching. See you guys tomorrow, and in the meantime... Oh no! It's coming back! I talked for too long. The nose itch is here.